We're in the last month of the year, which is crazy because, hello, 2025, literally, where did you go? But before I can get excited about December and Christmas, it's time to look back on my last month. I read 6 books in November, so stick around as I tell you what they were, what they're about, what I liked and disliked about them, and what I rated them out of 5 stars. And if you're new here, hi, welcome. I'm Katerina. I chat about all things books on this channel, and if that's your jam, why not subscribe? Okay, so kicking off, the very first book I read in November was Wuthering by Emily Bronte. And yes, I saw the Yesified film trailer and I wanted to read the book ahead of the new film. Sue me. So this story is set in the North Yorkshire Moors, which represent because that's actually where I'm from, and it's centered around this tumultuous relationship between a man who was taken in as an orphan by this very wealthy family and this family's daughter. However, in fear of tainting her reputation and her social status, she marries a wealthier, higher class man. And the heartbreak this causes essentially leads her previous lover to spiral and just essentially create chaos for the families for generations to come. And my honest rating for this book is 3 stars, which I feel conflicted about because I know this is a well-loved classic, but there were both things I liked and disliked about this novel. For things I liked, above all, this is a very powerful story about familial generational trauma. It's incredible that this book is almost marketed as a love story because this couple is very toxic. And I'm talking about Britney Spears level of toxic. We see the characters throughout choose selfishness, revenge, and just horrible behavior over and over again. And the author honestly did such a marvelous job in showcasing how childhood trauma can fester in us until we're adults, and how this nature of abuse is almost cyclical and can be passed down to the next generation, basically destroying everyone in its path. I also admired the way that the author showed how intimate domestic spaces like their homes can literally be places of hell for them. That line in Charlie XCX's song for the film, I Think I'm Gonna Die in This House, is literally the perfect embodiment of the whole book. And I very much enjoyed how the story isn't narrated by the couple themselves, but by second and third hand accounts by those around them. I think this is a good choice because it definitely takes the romanticism out of the dynamic as we see more objective viewpoints of what was actually happening. However, there were a few things that I disliked about the book. Overall, this is a very difficult read. There were so many times I would have to go back and reread pages because I was just like, what is actually going on here? Firstly, there's multiple narrators, and it's never clearly stated who is narrating and at what time period they're talking about. And sometimes literally the narrators narrate to each other, and I couldn't tell what was in the past and what was in the present because the timeline was also non-linear. Also, the story essentially revolves around 3 or 4 different families, and the characters are usually referred to by their last names. But there's also multiple people that have their first names as other people's last names. Like there are so many Lintons and so many Earnshawns and there's so many Cathys and Heathcliffs. So I was getting really frustrated when reading it because it would refer to someone and I'd be like, well, which Linton is that? Which Heathcliff is that? Who are we actually talking about here? And it's not helped by the fact that this is an old book, the language is more archaic and it is more difficult to read, which isn't really a criticism I like to put with books, but coupled with the fact that everything else felt more confusing that could have been clearer, the language then was just overall harder. And this just took me so long to finish this book because I genuinely kept getting headaches whilst reading it. I still liked it overall and would genuinely say it is worth reading at least once in your life, but if you are to read it, my advice to you is 1, take your time, do not rush this. It's easier to absorb when you can read at your own pace. And 2 is to always have the story's family tree next to you whilst reading it. This genuinely helped me out so much, but I only really thought about doing this halfway through the book. So do it at the beginning and it will really help you out. But for my next novel, I felt like I needed a bit of a breather after that one. So the next book I read last month was actually a novella, and it was Ventura and the Ninth Kingdom by Sylvia Plath. So this is a short story, and it is a very short story because it's literally only 60 pages. And we follow a girl who, without knowing why, her parents send her off on a train, and it's journeying towards a mysterious destination called the Ninth Kingdom. And along this trip, she becomes increasingly more unsettled as she realizes that something is amiss. And I'm not going to tell you any more on the synopsis because I genuinely think that the less you know about the story going into it, the better. And I gave this novella 4 stars, and I really enjoyed it, and maybe that's because I knew nothing about it going into it. Sylvia Plath actually wrote this story when she was super young, but it got rejected by various publishers. But I'm really glad that it's part of the Faber Stories collection and resurfaced because I genuinely think it's been one of my favourite short stories I've read in a while. The whole feeling of this book is very dreamlike, but also very daunting at the same time. It kind of feels like a dream where you don't really know what's happening, but you kind of roll with it anyway. But suddenly you get this like feeling of dread because you know something is wrong, but you can't really put your finger on what. And that's what this book is like. It really gave me chills when reading it, and I would actually say it's quite a spooky read. And I thought the story was really cool because you as a reader can have your own interpretation of what the story means itself. However, I know not all people like this, so I'm just flagging that in case you're a person that prefers a book with a crystal clear plot. But I really liked it, and I actually immediately wanted to read it again, which I did because it was just really cool, and you kind of see the book in a different light when you have your own interpretation of the story. The only thing I would say I disliked about the story is maybe the ending. It's a little bit too open-ended and weird for me, and you can't really figure out what totally happened. But everything leading up to that point was 5 stars. I thought it was very well written. And for a piece that's so short, I think that's just super impressive. When I read short story collections, I want tales like this in it because this was just so good. So after that well-needed breather of a book, I was actually craving a romance because I think I expected Wuthering Heights to be a little bit more of a romance, and it wasn't, so I then wanted to read one. So the third book I read last month was You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. This book is a contemporary romance novel, which, to be honest, is very rare when I pick these up. And the story centers on a young black woman who attempts to navigate her way through life again after her partner dies. And we follow her as she explores new relationships, all whilst confronting grief, trauma, as well as her desires. And I'm going to keep the synopsis for this book short again, not because it's worth knowing little about it going into it, but just because it was a terrible book, and I rated it 0.5 star. I think I was fooled by the poetic title of this book because honestly, this is one of the worst books I read all year. I genuinely feel like I'm deserving of financial compensation after reading this moral mess of a book. There are many reasons I dislike this, but I'm going to try and keep it short and just give you 3. Firstly, the plot itself was just criminal and nonsensical. It was just frustrating as a whole experience to read. And I literally don't even care about spoiling the plot in this book because it's just so bad and you deserve to know what it is before you even get into it. After grieving her husband for 5 years, she just suddenly decides to go to a party with her best friend and then shag a stranger and then date him. And then she decides to sack him off and then date his best friend and then sack him off and then date his dad. And she also expects everyone to be supportive of it. That's it. That's the plot. Secondly, all the characters were just horrible and annoying. The main character essentially uses her husband's death as a reason to be a menace to society. And I'm not talking about this genre of like messy female characters because I love those. I protect them with my whole heart. This main character is just a bad person or was just badly written. She has absolutely no personality and she truly believes that she can be insufferable to everyone else just because of her grief. Her literal embodiment is, well, I can treat people badly and ruin their self-esteem and be selfish and make morally bankrupt decisions because I deserve to be happy. And her best friend is just as annoying as well because she's there egging her on, being like, yes, girl, go sit on his dick, go shag his dad. Like, what? This did not pass the Bechdel test either because literally every conversation they have is about having sex with a man. And the third reason why this was bad is because the writing itself was just horrendous. It was cringe and just like Wattpad levels of bad. It's full of cliches, the dialogue is horrendous to read, and it just overall romanticizes trauma. I literally knew by page 50 that this was going to be a struggle to read, and here we are with 0.5 star later. Moving swiftly on, the fourth book I read last month was actually one I've been reading for 2 years. And I know that sounds insane, but I'll explain why it took me so long. And that book is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. So this is a collection of personal writings taken from the diary of a Roman emperor in around 170 AD. And all these reflections are rooted in Stoic philosophy and mainly explore his musings in self-discipline, duty, and morality, as well as wider themes of the nature of the universe and the value of undergoing hardship. And I rated this book 4 stars because you know what? Marcus Aurelius has some pretty cool things to say. The reason why this took me so long to read is because this book isn't like a continuous narrative. It's various standalone paragraphs or even just sentences of text that's unconnected to each other. Like literally someone just went through his diaries and just pulled out lines that they thought that were interesting. And the things he wrote about were these very profound philosophical ideas on human behavior and also just fate and the universe. And as the title suggests, you kind of have to meditate on it. So I would only end up reading a few pages at a time just so I could let what he said sink in. And honestly, the most fascinating thing I found about this book wasn't just the notions and ideas that he discussed, but how even though this book is almost 2,000 years old, I could still relate to the things that he was saying. A lot of his challenges and fears were very inherently human and relatable. And it's quite grounding to know that the issues I face are not unique. You know, humans have been dealing with the same things for thousands of years. And this both just honestly amazed me and comforted me at the same time, and I was just very impressed by how articulate his musings were. The only reason I disliked this book and didn't give it 5 stars is that purely because it just gets repetitive. The same messaging is said again and again, but it's just dressed up in different ways. So by the end of the book, it did feel quite tedious, and I ended up getting slightly bored. But in his defense, this is from his personal diaries that he didn't know were going to be published for others to read. And not gonna lie, I write about the same things over and over in my journal, so I don't blame him. But moving on to something a little bit modern and set today, the fifth book I read in November was Beautyland by Marie-Helene Bertino. I would describe this book as a quirky coming of age story as we follow an alien girl that's sent to Earth as a baby for the reason that her home planet wants to study humanity and they want her to report back her findings, including humanity's joys, their cruelties, and also understanding relationship dynamics and pop culture and just what it means to be human, which includes the very complicated and messy experience of being alive, and it explores belonging and connection and longing. And I also gave this book 4 stars, which I'm not gonna lie, my October was abysmal for reading, so I'm pretty delighted to have 3 4 stars, but in 1 month. I really enjoyed this book because a lot of the notions explored were around identity and loneliness that comes with being a human today. I personally resonated with this book, and I also think a lot of other people would too. When she's growing up, she feels very different to those around her. She can't really understand why she can't connect with others the way that other people do. Obviously, it's because we know she's an alien, but the way it's described in the book really threw me back to being a kid when I felt like I couldn't really connect with others. To be honest, sometimes I actually feel like that now. Like everything can just feel so overwhelming and that I don't belong here on this planet sometimes. I actually did question at one point if this book was meant to be an allegory for those living with neurodivergences because she seems to show really similar traits. And I saw loads of other people online ask this too and also discuss it, but I truly think this book is just her being an alien. I also do have to flag this, but this is actually a little bit of a sad book because it does explore themes of grief and loss quite heavily too. But it's also very bittersweet because it talks about the uniqueness of life and the beauty that comes with being human. And it's just very lovely to watch her report back on human quirks and behavior because it just kind of made me feel happy to be part of humanity, which is quite rare nowadays. The reason I didn't give this 5 stars is because this book was initially quite slow and it was really hard to get into for the first few chapters. But once you're familiar with her tone and her style of writing, it then flows a lot more smoothly. I would also like to flag this because I think this was kind of marketed incorrectly. This book isn't sci-fi. I would honestly say it's more coming of age literary fiction. I did see online a few people disappointed that this did not have the space and aliens that they were expecting. So I just wanted to flag that if you were planning on reading it. And finally, the very last book I read in November was A Bright Girl Lacks Focus by Cindy Robinson. This book is a memoir and it essentially delves into the author's experience living life neurodivergent, particularly with ADHD. And it's a journey from since when she was very young and how she's overcome self-doubt and also achieved self-acceptance. She recounts stories all throughout her childhood and adolescence, all the way till today as a wife and a mother. And I rated this book 3 stars, which I'll be real, kind of feels weird to do as a memoir, but I'll try and explain my reasoning as to why. Firstly, I need to preface to anyone reading this that there are a lot of trigger warnings that you should be aware of, including childhood trauma and sexual abuse that goes into quite a bit of detail. So it goes without saying that this is an incredibly raw story and it does discuss a lot of heavy topics, but I did rate how open and honest the author was about it. And I really liked the tone of this book. It felt very genuine and earnest. It was like she was talking to me as a reader as one of her best friends, and this made it feel very refreshing and easy to read. A lot of people in my life actually do have ADHD, so this was really insightful for me to understand how they go through life. And I would genuinely say that this memoir has helped me be more empathetic about what they go through. And whilst there's not many reviews about this book because it is relatively new, I did see a lot of other neurodivergent people really like it. They said it was a great memoir because it helped validate their own experiences and made them feel seen, which I feel is important for me to mention because I am myself not neurodivergent, at least that I know of, so I wanted to still voice the people who are neurodivergent and what they thought about the book. The reason I rated this 3 stars and not more is more for the formatting and the overall narrative of the book. I know this is self-published, but there were quite a lot of spelling and grammatical errors which kept pulling me out of the memoir whilst I was reading it. And it was on very simple things too, so it kind of made me feel like the book wasn't properly produced and a little bit rushed. And I usually love short chapters, but I didn't really love just how short the chapters were throughout. I know neurodivergent neurodivergent people said they liked this because it could keep their attention. But I personally felt like she would just start to get into a story and then it would abruptly end and then she'd bounce to another topic in the next chapter. I felt like there was no actual reflection or messaging as I was reading. It was just purely a collection of stories. Whereas I was keen to know what she learned from that experience, you know, what it taught her and how she felt about it. The only real messaging I came away with is that she only felt like she had a reason to live once she became a mother, which each to their own, but I don't know. I don't really like the idea of becoming like saved once you have kids. It just doesn't really sit well with me, but this is a personal thing. But as always, this is just my opinion. Please take everything I say with a pinch of salt, especially as an opinion coming from someone who isn't neurodivergent. And there you have it, folks. Those are all the books I read in November. In terms of my personal life last month, when the weather gets seriously cold and dark, I mainly just go to pubs and be a hermit at home. I had a few friends' birthdays, so I was pretty much out every weekend celebrating, including going to Drum Sheds in London for the first time, which is this venue that was basically an old IKEA that got turned into a huge event space, but that was really fun. I also had to go to Paris last month for a work conference, so I spent a few days in the city going to different talks and attending different dinners, which was fun. Also, the biggest news is probably that I had laser eye surgery. I've not got any footage of me recovering as my eyes were quite bruised for a while, but I've since recovered and I can't believe how incredible it is to no longer need glasses or contact lenses because they were honestly the bane of my life at one point. And just in general, whenever the weather's been sunny lately, I've been wrapping up and going on as many walks as I can so I don't end up vitamin D deficient by April. In terms of TV and films I watched part 1 of Stranger Things season 5 and I also watched the Frankenstein film 3 times because I loved it. I actually made a video on book recommendations if you liked Frankenstein, which I will link down below. And whilst I was recovering from my laser eye surgery, I actually did rewatch a lot of films, and that includes Interstellar, Dodgeball, The Ringer, Due Date, Happy Gilmore, and Paddington 2, which I think is the most movies I've watched in 1 month all year. So there's that. And there you have it. That was my November all summed up in one video. Let me know in the comments what your November was like, and please tell me what were your favorite books of the last month. If you enjoyed this video, as always, please drop a like down below. It really helps my channel out by pushing my face in the algorithm so more people can hear me talk about books. And if you're new here, please subscribe. I make new videos chatting about all things books. Feel free to follow me on my socials. I have a Goodreads account where I update what I read in real time. And feel free to also follow me on my Instagram. I post more personal things on there, but I also post about the books I've read, letting you know what they're about, and what I rate them out of 10. And as always, sending lots of love to my returning subscribers who continuously watch and support me. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I shall see you in the next one. Bye!